Tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai, tauti mai, ki tēnei hui, kia ora. Welcome everybody. My name is Ian Wright and I'm a Deputy Vice Chancellor, and it's my pleasure to welcome our guests and to give some insight into the Student First program. So for many of you, the Student First program is probably just this nebulous thing that's happening in the background, which occasionally interacts with your day job, but this year is quite an important year in the Student First program. The concept of the Student First program is completely revamping our student management system from enrollment, recruitment, progression, and ultimately maybe alumni. It is entirely about the focus around the student, and it is entirely around changing our processes, our business processes, our academic processes, such that the student coming to the University of Canterbury has a far better experience than they currently do. The aside is, it is technology enabled, which is what this presentation and morning is about, is to give some insight about the technology, but I stress very, very clearly, and Dave I think understands this, this is a technology enabled business change process. So it's about the student, it's about academic processes, it's about business processes. It just happens to have a lot of cool technology making all of that possible. So it's my pleasure to invite three people this morning to give some insight about what's happening. Firstly, you'll hear from Ian Vanstone, who's the Chief Technology Officer from Integration Works, which is providing one of the key technologies in what we're doing. Then we'll hear from Dave Quinnell, who is actually leading a team of, am I allowed to say geeky people?
Yeah, man.
Right, okay, so there's a team of geek, so hopefully you won't take offence, but there is a team of very dedicated code developers that are actually making this possible, and Dave is leading that team. And then we also have Chris Thornley, who is providing some overarching guidance and framework for the architecture of what is being built. So, you've heard enough from me. I'd like to now invite Ian Vanstone just to talk about what's happening across the whole industry in clients like us trying to do what we're trying to do. Ian.
Thank you, Ian. Good morning, everybody. I have a bit of a tendency to wander around when I present, so if I go away from the microphone and you can't hear me, please throw something at me or shout out. Before I begin, just so I know who's around in the audience today, a bit of participation. So can everyone stand up, please? And can you now sit down if you work in IT? Okay, that's great. Thanks very much. That's all you have to do today, apart from listen and ask great questions later on. So for the agenda, that's me. So I work for Integration Works, Chief Technology Officer. We are a business that connects IT systems and businesses using IT systems. We're founded in New Zealand, but we've got offices in London and Sydney and Brisbane, so it's a bit of a Kiwi success story. I won't say too much about us, but I'm happy to answer lots of questions about Integration Works afterwards, if you so wish. Let's move on to what I want to speak to today. The first thing is not about the business program here, it's not about technology here, it's not about technology anyway, it's about your lives. Look back into your history and think about all of the devices that you had on you. Mobile phones, connected things, back in 1990. How many were in your household? Not many. Moving on, 2010, 20 years later, you've got satellite TV, but your TV's not smart. And you've got maybe a hybrid car, one of those ones, but it's not an EV, it's not an electric vehicle really. And then moving on to 2020, your house is going to be full of devices. Yep, you're going to have multiple devices, not just your tablets and your mobiles, your connected watch, but your front door will be instrumented so that you know who's coming up to knock. Your post box has gone away, and you've now got a parcel delivery box that sits there that notifies you when things are going in and it's actually talking to the logistics companies at the same time. So our lives are just increasingly digital, and we are connected to some device at arm's length for almost the entirety of our waking lives. That's a statement today, and it's only going to get more so in the future. So with that in mind, what I want to talk about next is what happened to businesses as we changed our lives. So back in 1990, lots of bricks and mortar businesses. You want to buy a piece of clothing, you go down to the high street, you want to go do something else, you always go into a building. So I've done a lot of work in financial services in my time. The old branch was a focus. Even when ATMs came in, there was still branch. And branches have been growing around the globe until recently. So moving on to 2010, some of that bricks and mortar started to have some threats to its business model. Some companies adapted and created websites that we at home accessed on our nice desktop computers. And then clearly on towards 2020, some of that bricks and mortar business is starting to go away. You'll all know big names that used to be on the high street that basically didn't do well because they didn't go digital fast enough. And you'll know lots of other brands in your lives whereby they didn't react fast enough. But most businesses have adapted. They've kind of expanded their digital channels, yet less reliance on the bricks and mortar. And they're really going after what we do in our own lives, which is we want to be digitally connected, and we're demanding that businesses provide those digital interfaces. So there's a bigger picture here. There's a picture you probably can't read very well from the World Economic Forum here. And it's not just about apps and digital businesses and things like that. It's really about, there's a bigger social change going on here, about digital social lives, digital connectivity all through the day. And this is just, what we're talking about here is just a part of the way that our society is changing. Now I'm going to talk about IT delivery. So this is where it starts getting a little bit techie for the non-technologists in the audience today, who is the majority, so well done on that. And so as businesses, or as users of businesses, as customers have pushed for more digital interfaces, businesses have had to create more and more and more digital interfaces for their customers, and it's pushed lots of pressure onto IT. Now IT for decades has been using a delivery model known as waterfall, whereby we have a business stakeholder, maybe it's someone who knows what they want, maybe it's someone with a budget, maybe it's both, and they have a requirement, they want a thing, in this case an X, I want an X. And then a team of IT people and business analysts and other hangers-on, they basically document a set of requirements. From there, they hand over to another team who does a design for lots of systems. From there, those teams hand over to different teams who go on and develop something. And those teams hand over to a different set of people again. Now the main communication method in waterfall delivery was Word documents. So you want an X at the top there. By the time that's translated to something actually running in production, there's a lot of Chinese whispers going on here. There's a lot of translation errors from step to step. Now that's a danger. It also means it's really difficult to test against requirements because you have to trace that through Word documents and human conversations. Now, these projects, an example here, sometimes took a year, sometimes took 3 years. The business stakeholder here was not involved. They gave the requirement up front, they might have popped into meetings from time to time, but they don't know what's going on. At the end, after 1 or 3 years, they get given their X, except that because of the translation, it ended up being a Y. So they're not too happy. And there are numerous cases, I'm sure if you work in technology, you would have been involved in some of these where we aimed to do one thing, and after 3 years it kind of ended up as something else, and the business wasn't kind of on the same page in terms of expectations. So that feedback loop of 1 to 3 years just wasn't working. Now it also wasn't working because as we've added more systems and complexity, because of the digital demands, those requirements exercises get really inefficient because you're having to analyze more and more IT systems, and you're also having to predict what's going to happen in 3 years when you go into production. So predicting the future is hard for technologists, but it's also hard for business people. How do you know what's going to be going on in 3 years' time? You have to make bets, big bets. And as you know from previous failures and in the newspapers around New Zealand and around the world, some of those bets are considerably sizable, where we asked for an X And after 3 years, we got a Y, and we spent all these millions of dollars on it, and that's not acceptable. The other point here is that, you know, X and Y might be useless after 3 years because things do move on, and we're not very good at predicting the future. So what we know is that we as consumers want to interact digitally in our lives with businesses, with universities, with everything. We know that businesses must meet our digital demands, so they have to build digital channels, digital interfaces. We know that that increases pressure on IT organisations. We know that that pressure on IT creates complexity, and we also know that the legacy way of delivering is slow, so complexity and slowness break together. So as the business demands more and more agility, the legacy IT organisations are getting slower and slower and slower. So something had to give. So over a decade ago, these were the first where something gave. Yeah. These are pure digital companies on colossal scale with double-digit or triple-digit growth for a decade or more. So these businesses can't do things slowly. They are, by their very nature, connected, complex IT environments. So they had to do something different. So these companies have led the way. They are very, very, very different to most businesses in New Zealand, and they're very, very, very different to the University of Canterbury. But they did do some stuff that we can learn from, reuse, and over time, we have become more interested in some of the concepts that these guys created, or these global giants created. So one of the first ones I want to call out to is agile methodologies. So instead of waterfall, we now have fast feedback loops. And these are just Google Trends analysis. Has anyone used Google Trends before? Yeah, popular search terms over the years. So Agile Scrum, the popularity of that, or the interest in it, I should say, has been steadily growing for a long time. So the date on the far left there is 2004, and then today is over on the right. So a slow move. So you can see that there was interest in Agile, and as teams and delivery teams in regular businesses, just like those around us now, as they got faster in their delivery cycles, fast feedback, better business engagement, they hit another blocker, and that was manually deploying things from environment to environment actually became too onerous, too slow. So we needed automation, we needed DevOps. So you can see a while later, DevOps is a big thing. We want to automate pipelines, and we want to kind of merge up how we see production and non-production environments and make them more consistent.
What's DevOps? Just unpack that for the lay people.
Sorry, that's a really good question. So the question is, what's DevOps for lay people? So it's a joint of development and operations, but what it really equates to is automation of IT processes. So we used to test things manually, and we're used to deploy things onto servers manually, and when everything was manual, everything was really slow, basically. So DevOps just equate to automation this time. So automation, faster, more reliable, okay, and less risk. So we've got the project methodology sorted out. We've automated stuff. The next big blocker we hit was our systems do not flex. Commercial off-the-shelf offerings don't flex. We can try and customize them, but that often makes things worse. The stuff that we're coding even doesn't flex. So we needed something else. And I'm not going to go too far into what microservices are today, but they are a way of componentizing IT architectures so that you can plug and play and adapt capability faster. It's also about how those microservices are connected. It's not just about creating little pieces of IT just for the sake of it. It's an architectural style that enables flexibility and agility. So you can see that microservices has only been popular of recent years, but as I'll come on to say, it's very much seen as a norm now for new projects and programs. So on the chart earlier, we had a number of problems with waterfall, and these are the ones down the left here in the red, so nebulous stakeholders and things. Agile solved lots of these issues, these challenges. So a few of the big ones are though, about that business engagement and dealing with requirements. In waterfall delivery, what we tried to do was, in a period of a few weeks or a few months, is come up with every requirement we need to fulfill a need in a few years' time. That's a really hard job. Even finding the right stakeholders within a requirements activity up front and all trying to predict the future and all having conflicting demands means that what you actually get is a lot of groupthink that those requirements are the right thing. And once you've actually committed to them, because IT used to be pre-microservices, used to be so inflexible, there is a hell of a lot of inertia. So if you want to change request a project down the line, yes, you can do that, but it might actually be very hard to do technically or commercially, which means slow delivery, increased cost on projects, and those classic over budget, over time that we saw so much over the years. The other thing here, though, is that it has to be full automation these days. Automation is the only way to do this properly. There's also retest costs. When everyone has to retest things manually, that's very slow. Whenever we hit a defect, we want to be able to test that again very, very quickly. And in the old world of waterfall, it was quite common for test costs, not requirements, not design, not development, but test to be the largest budget, the largest price in a project, which seems really odd, doesn't it? You'd think it would be designing it or building it, not actually checking that it works. So part of the reason for the agile thriving is this cone of uncertainty. So we set off down a path, and in the early days, if we take some short aims, then there's limited scope to deviate from those expectations. But the longer a process is without checking in with stakeholders especially, then the greater the scope for deviation from expectations. And so what happens is, when we compare waterfall to agile, is that waterfall heads off steaming down a path and finds it very hard to pivot and ends up in a place that's, even if you know you're heading in the wrong direction, I've seen huge programs head off in the right direction, but the momentum is so strong that they continue, even though over budget, over cost. So here we see the beauty of agile is it allows you to pivot along the way, and it allows you to retest with your stakeholders along the way, where should we be, where should we be? And the really important thing about modern business is that as digital demands increase, the business pushes more requirements, we can no longer do those 3-year planning cycles. We need to know what the market needs in 6 months' time. The market changes regularly. So this ability to pivot was useful 10 years ago, but we didn't have it, but it's even more useful today to be able to pivot along the way. So I won't spend too long on microservices because this is a non-technical audience, but as I said, it's a way of designing IT systems so that you can adapt them and flex them at lower cost, and a lot easier, so that you're moving away from those rigid systems of the past. Microservices as a concept are now a norm. So most companies in New Zealand now assess whether to use them. I was saying up front when I was having a chat beforehand, 4 years ago when I did my first microservices strategy, it was a really hard sell, even to leading technologists. It was a very risky concept. So move on 3 years ago, was talking about putting Docker into enterprises. Docker is a technology that basically allows you to simplify and lower risk your IT deployments. Now it is a de facto of IT teams that Integration Works works with, but 3 years ago it was a hard sell. People are worried about it. We've gone from hard sell to de facto in a very short period of time, and that's the same with microservices. So when we go and work with government departments even, they are doing microservices. When we go and work with banks, they've been doing it for a long while in their digital departments. This is not a thing that the University of Canterbury has created or even led the way on, but the University of Canterbury has benefited from others lowering the path to resistance and creating things that are easier to use. There's heaps of stats out in the industry about this automation piece. Companies that truly automate their delivery pipeline have a competitive advantage. It has a fundamental effect on the successful outcomes of their digital business. This is a well-known fact now within IT teams, and it's a growing piece of knowledge for business as well. And actually one of the big changes culturally in IT teams, as Agile and DevOps have come along is that the business and IT are becoming more unified rather than the separated concerns of the past. They are fundamentally entwined in a digital business. So that's about IT and where we've come from and where we've come to. The university is affected here too. So you would have all read reports about the digital opportunities and threats that posed in the education sector. There are a number of changes happening. This was part of a workshop that I actually ran here last year, talking about the future needs of an IT department in New Zealand and what that might mean in the education sector. Now, I won't go into all of these, but you'll all recognise that there will be a much greater digital footprint with students, with staff, with alumni in future, and greater demands on you in a competitive environment. That will be that will be an advantage. If your competitors are still using paper-based forms and all of your students have apps, that's a competitive advantage. That's where you need to be. So, a bit of a summary. We know that our lives are increasingly connected. Yeah, it's just obvious. We want to do stuff on our mobile phones, and in a couple of years' time, we get used to the fact that lots of our house has these cool doorbells and parcel delivery services and things like that. Digital business is business. That they're entwined now, and so as our demands increase, then businesses themselves are having to up their game digitally. That's about IT teams modernising. It's about better business engagement between IT and business. We know that the old waterfall style of delivery didn't work. It doesn't work. Those days are gone now. There are very, very few companies that we deal with setting off big programs of work focused on waterfall now. They're usually either full agile or an approximation between waterfall and agile, but no one's pure waterfall as we were doing a few years ago. We know that agile, DevOps and microservices are now a de facto for new digital business IT projects, and we also know that this has real business implications in terms of the bottom line results or the successful business outcomes. And we know that there is disruption here as well. It's not just about students wanting to do things on their app rather than having to post forms. This is about, businesses, industries are changing. So being a very fast follower, or being someone who, being an organisation that can take concepts that have been proven elsewhere, deliver them here, but faster than competition, is fundamentally going to keep you ahead in what will be a fast changing industry over the next few years. Right, that is my section done. I'll be back for the Q&A later, and I will be hanging around afterwards if anyone has any questions for me also. Thanks very much. Over to Dave.
My name's Dave Quinnell. I'm the Technology Manager for the Student First program. Been working here for almost 2 years now. It's been quite fun, to put it mildly. So what is the program about? It's a multi-year program of work to transform the student experience. So as Ian Wright mentioned, we had some issues with our previous way of doing things, and we needed to modernise the way the organisation works. So what we're doing is we're focusing closely on the student experience. It really is about the student, 100% from our perspective. One of the benefits of giving us doing that is giving us the ability to actually focus some of that attention that we're giving to the student on the staff experience as well, which we're in the process of working on right at the moment. And we're trying to also make sure that the organisation understands that the innovation that comes out of using the sort of technologies that Ian's talking about will give the organisation a massive benefit. It really is quite a significant benefit when you start levering and changing things really rapidly, as you'll see as we start moving through the presentation. So we're trying to move from a very traditional approach to doing things to a significantly faster one, and some people here from ITS who are in the boat doing exactly the same thing as well at the moment. Okay, so why are we doing this? So why are we actually embarking on this journey? So we had a bit of a problem with the previous implementation of a student management system. I'm pretty sure that you guys would have heard something about this, but it didn't really go that well. We were 2 years into it and we had received about 5% of what we expected to have at that point. And we fully expected to have the thing finished by about 2.5 years in and up and running. So we're only at 5%. On that point, the program board decided to pull the rug out from underneath it. There was an element of pain and agony going on here, and it was getting very, very expensive. We had bought another ERP, much like Oracle, but what we ended up with was the thing called Tribal Sits, which was a very, very popular piece of software around the world. It is the de facto standard in Europe, and to some extent in the South Pacific as well. But by doing that, you end up being locked significantly into the vendor's way of doing things, and you're completely locked into that vendor. So if the functionality isn't capable of being provided in that software, you are locked in. That's the only opportunity you've got. Trying to change things in big ERP systems is really, really hard, as Ian said. Very painful. And we actually experienced that, the previous project experienced that for 2 years while we were trying to grapple with fitting that product to the way UC works. And they didn't make it. They pulled the bug. So it didn't help that the software was over 20 years old when we bought it. Right? I mean, this thing is really out of the ark. It really wasn't a very, very old piece of software. In fact, it's probably 10 years older than the Jade software that it was meant to replace. There you go. One of the significant drawbacks is we were getting releases twice a year, and they were taking over 3 months each with a team of 15 to 20 people to test it. And there were still significant issues every single release that went out. So the university had done some studies on what had happened to the project, the old project earlier, and basically there were some recommendations that came out from the various consultants that had been involved in that. First one was carry on, throw a whole bunch more money at doing the same thing. You could look at other ERP vendors, other packages on the market. They're all ERP-like. ERP being enterprise resource product. What? Planning, sorry. The other option was to do nothing and just carry on with good old Jade. There were some issues in there. And the last option was to change the paradigm and not carry on bashing your head against the same brick wall and expect to get a different result. So that's what we did. And to all credit to the university and the governance of the organisation, they actually backed that 100%. Brilliant. Okay, so I'm almost finished here. I've only got 5 minutes at the start. So this is where we started off with. So we have actually built a system that actually now manages all of the student enrolment apart from PhDs, you know, and those big people. The current way that works is that it's the very first implementation of social media connection. Previously, if you wanted to enroll in UC, you had to get an IT account. If your name was Smith, you were immediately locked into a situation where you had to wait for somebody to recognise if you're a duplicate and then come back and free your account up. So that could have been days later. So if you wanted to enroll, you were potentially waiting for days to even get into the system to actually have a look. So we kind of thought that the obvious thing to do here is to try and remove all the barriers to actually getting people in here, remove a whole bunch of silly questions that we kind of asked as well about how many cars your mother had driven and all that sort of stuff. So we took all that stuff out and just made it really clean and crisp. And the obvious way to do a lot of that connectivity is to allow people with Google or Facebook accounts to connect up just by clicking a button and you're in. And that's exactly what we've done. Just to give you some idea of the 313,000 students we've got sitting in Jade, good old Jade, there are about 28,500 of them in a state that basically indicated they tried to get in. Okay, and that's over the period that SITS was in place here, about 2 years. Okay, so 28,500 potential students we could have missed out on, Maybe we did, maybe we didn't. But they didn't, they definitely didn't enrol. Right, so I'm going to hand over to Chris Thornley now, just to go over the technology. I'll be back.
My name is Chris Thornley. I'm also from Integration Works. I'm a senior solution architect there. So I come into large nebulous sort of systems and try and bring them into some sort of structure so that we can actually deliver them. I tend to drift into some technology words, so Bronwyn, please keep me on track. If you want to ask any questions about any acronyms I use, then please let me know. So the first thing we had to do when we came in here was look at what the actual Student Information System, or SIMS, is actually made up of. And if you look at it underneath the covers and you break it down into its functional components, you can find that actually 30% of the activities that are actually conducted there are customer relationship or student relationship management functions. Sending out emails, notifications, chasing up, collecting the information about the student, the emergency contact details, etc. We then have about 25% curriculum management. That's courses, programs, qualifications, prerequisites and co-requisites. About 20% of that, on top of that, then is the achievement calculation and progression rules. So have you qualified, have you not qualified? And then on top of that, you have the 20% application and admission rules and assessment rules for allowing people to attend study at university. And then the final 5% is sort of the drags and bits and pieces that we decided to use out of either JADE or SITS to fulfill other needs, ceremonies, etc. Now, we have a number of technology in this space, like Dave said, these ERPs, or large application portfolios that conduct activities across all of these features and functions for an education institute. Oracle, Technology One, Tribal and JADE. The problem is that if you looked at these functions and features, how many of these are actually heavily customized by a university? How many universities have exactly the same curriculum portfolio, prerequisites and co-requisites? How many are deciding to do double degrees, merged degrees, or producing quickly a degree structure to get out to market when an opportunity has been identified? How many institutes across the world have the exact same application and admission rules? In New Zealand, for example, we have different international calculations than, say, America would. The achievement calculation and progression is also a very complicated area around customization. So what you'll usually find is you come into these products thinking they're out of the box and go install it, press a couple of buttons, and you've got yourself a student management system perfectly fitted for University of Canterbury. And in fact, we have to do a lot of customization inside those tools to achieve the outcomes. And sometimes you find that the customization you can do goes only so far, and actually you now have to change the business to fit to the model that the student information system supports. So coming into that space, then we had obviously, when I came in, we had two of these systems to look at in the architecture. We had SITS, which was 5% implemented, and we had JADE, which was fulfilling the other 95%. The integration between those two parts, and I'm talking about the flow of information and events as some student logs into SITS and then goes across to JADE, and the assessment's done inside JADE and they can see it inside SITS, was not fit for purpose. We had a number of issues with the integration where adapters would fall over and then have to be restarted, and the student would be waiting for the result to come through and they wouldn't see it, and they have to keep refresh, raising errors with the contact centre, overwhelming them. So that really caused a number of a lot of churn there in establishing that nice flow of information between systems. As I said, the complex multi-system environment, SITS and JADE, what we had to do was at least simplify the landscape and remove one at least initially, and then look at how we look at breaking down that second component into those functional components I mentioned before. Part of the strategy for that is to simplify it, and secondly is to embargo any new connections so we can basically wall it off, establish good patterns of good integration and good events coming out the back of it so that we can leverage the information but not necessarily interact with it as part of our daily lives. The third part was the user experience issues in the old system. We had, when a student comes to University of Canterbury, they have a number of systems to navigate to before they actually understand what courses they actually want to enrol in and what qualification they want to enrol in. They go to the course information system to find out whether the course is particularly right for them. They'll go to the website to decide whether or not the qualification is right for them. They may navigate to the scholarship system, they may navigate to a number of other systems, but they have to keep that in their mind the whole way through this process about what that lineage of the qualification, the courses, the scholarship has to be kept inside their mind when they're chopping and changing between these systems. And that puts a lot of cognitive load and stress upon the student. Am I enrolling into the right thing? Is it fit for my needs? And again, that's coming back out the other side through the contact centre, through the support staff, and the advisors are having to chase up these things because the student hasn't got a nice clear pathway from application to enrolment and then study. So what we did there was we've established a modern user interface layer, able to carry that context with it and be far more enriched with information from those various sources. We're also able to, in the future, embed the application that we've developed into the wider website structure of University Canterbury. So I'm talking about contextualisation of the website when the student arrives at www.canterbury.ac.nz. We know what qualifications they're actually enrolled in, so can we tune that experience for the user through that website now to their needs so that we're not showing them irrelevant information, and perhaps proposing to the student what other courses they would like to take rather than and prompting those questions for the user rather than them having to do it themselves. We also had a very complex customization, as I said in this previous slide, that was very difficult to test. I'll go into the test components later on, but our strategy for that was to compartmentalise the complexity, so to pull that into certain pockets of logic within the application and remove the complexity from the original application, so they become a far more vanilla, out of the box, next, install. You've got your applications now being installed, but the actual customization that University of Canterbury needs is actually pocketed off in an area that we can test robustly in a very fast way and a very consistent way. So we had to compartmentalise that complexity and establish test patterns. So how do we do that? How do we take those business needs and the changes that we're going to apply inside the architecture and work that through from the business outcome through to the stories that we want to deliver, defining the actual test criteria before we even enter into the development, so that when we come out of the end of that development, we're able to robustly test that piece of functionality. And what we call functionality, we also call, another word is a feature. So what we do is we deal in features inside the Student First project, and those features can overlap. Those features can be taken forward to a certain point and then maybe shelved if we found that they don't actually deliver the outcome that we need, or perhaps even taken through a number of iterations so that we're able to achieve a better result for the student. So as an example, one of the features we've just started developing and nearly finished into non-production day is the new course selector. So the course selector has gone through the first iteration, a far better user experience journey. We're testing out with students, we're finding feedback, we're doing another iteration on top of that to enhance it, to add in extra tuned queries so that the student, when they arrive there, they're prompted. If they're in the CUP qualification, they're only presented with CUP courses. If they're in an MBA course, MBA qual, they're presented with the MBA courses. And they don't have to go out and find this information. And that's part of that journey I was talking about before, with providing the student with a pathway rather than just allowing the student to think about what they have to do inside a very amorphous structure. So we do that by working in 3 to 4 months ahead of the release. So we have a 2-monthly release cycle that we're executing at the moment. So every 2 months, and this goes back to what Ian was saying around DevOps and the agility, is we're able to deliver well-tested, well-structured code into production in a 2-monthly release cycle with n number of features that have made it into that cut. Some features may slip out and they have to go into the next release, but the way that we do that is we work 3 to 4 months ahead of that release cycle, providing the foundations of what we need next. And it talks to what Ian was talking also about that cone of uncertainty. We're certain within the next 3 to 4 months, I know from an architect what foundations I need to apply so that I know that the business, their backlog of requirements can then fit on top of that. It's like a road or like a runway, if you imagine it. We're paving the way and then the code's coming on top. And what that enables us to do is enforce, and some of the fault failings of Agile has been the lack of structure within Agile. So when Agile projects were doing business change and business features, what happened was those features were taken literally and then just applied. And what we ended up with is with this growing massive ball of mud, you know. So by working 3 to 4 months ahead of that anticipated release, we're able to at least give some structure to that. So it's not a ball of mud that's growing as old classical Agile projects did. It's more of a structured, formal process about building a foundation work of a building. And going back down to that Agile process, that way of iterating, a way of delivering, is only really supported at its core by a very strong test-driven development approach. So in the old way, testing was very hard. So like I said, there was a lot of customization in those large monolithic systems. If you look at this picture here, it's a big house. We can't see inside the house. We can't see the rooms or the doors. We can see windows, and we may be able to code or configure into those windows of the house. But when you go and test it, it's one big shop. You can't test an individual piece by itself. And so any fixes incurred that need to happen during that time will have that slowness also about them. And it's a bit like whack-a-mole. You fix a defect over there, another defect pops up over here. You fix that defect over there, and another one pops up there. Because you can't see inside what's actually happening, you can't wall that off, it's very difficult to test. So the old system had 41 end-to-end tests, and those took 24 hours to complete. That included system setup time, standing up the environment, freshening the data, running the tests through end-to-end, all the way through, and then finally giving yourself a report at the end. And as an example, let's say, for example, back to the international rule, say New Zealand government decided that Australian citizens were no longer considered to be domestic students when studying in New Zealand. Seems like a very small rule that you just take out one code from a thing. But because we're coding inside this large monolith, we don't know what downstream effects that's going to have. It's not being walled off. There's no consistency within the architecture. So a change to that causes a defect, you'd have another 24-hour cycle before you found if that platform was now stable again. Looking at the new way of approach, which we've achieved, is we've actually broken that house down into its parts. So we've got the foundations, we have the walls, and we have the roof. And with that approach, it means that we can actually attack those areas independently. Back to the international rule, say for example you added in, removed Australia as being domestic student, we'll be able to run that one test independently and know that the rest of the system was actually achieving the outcome rather than having to test the entire system over and over again. And what it looks like now in the new world is we have 27 end-to-end tests that only take 3 minutes to execute. We have 925 UI tests with around about 2,000 odd API tests and 754 integration tests. So, and that in total only takes probably about 5 minutes to execute the entire end-to-end test cases. So you can see that rapid change that we've had in the platform, the consistency and the knowledge of how it functions. Another part we've done is actually aligning it to the tertiary education sector. So again, with that ball of mud, we don't want that ball of mud to be anything different than that, not to be aligned to the Education Institute. And with this approach to aligning to the CORDIT model, which is actually a conglomerate between Australia and New Zealand of tertiary education institutes, we've been able to align our componentry and architecture to that framework, which means that when we're talking about timetabling, we know how timetabling fits with our application. When we talk about building management, we know how building management fits with our application. Or other processes like marketing, we know how those processes fit with the application that we're developing. Finally, to wrap up, the business benefits of the approach is that we're driven by a business outcome. We're ensuring development is focused on minimal viable options for the features that we're delivering. We're doing a test-driven development, so we've got consistency, able to execute in an agile fashion. We're using industry standard widely adopted technology, so we no longer have vendor lock-in. We have an API platform-centric selection, and APIs are basically a way of interacting with systems without having to use graphical user interfaces. So that means that any application we bring into the stack, they have to be API enabled first. It means that we can slot them into our architecture, for example, CRM. Proactive monitoring, so any issues that happen inside the the website, we actually know about them before the student actually contacts the contact centre, so we're able to address them. And there's a number of these last year that we actually achieved. We picked up on a fix before the student contacted us. We have an education-aligned architecture as traceable components which enable flexibility and enable us to work with business context in the IT landscape. We have lightweight portable components, which means that I can deploy them, anybody can deploy them on their local laptop. I've actually installed it on a computer about this size, the entire architecture. But it also means that we can scale that up to large scales, and when we look at the academic calendar, enrolments and applications are a peak within inside the year, but it's not a peak, it's not all the time like that. So we don't need 60 servers sitting there trying to do applications and enrolments all year. Now we're actually able to scale up and scale down to demands, so we're not using consumption of resources, we're being green, yeah, it's good to be green. And then finally, we have a modern mobile-first user interface, so multiple channels with the same user interface. We don't have to have a web application, an application on your phone, another application over here, and invest UC's money in building 4 or 5 applications. We have one application that can be supported on multiple devices without any coding rework. And I'll hand over to Dave again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. That went a lot faster than I thought it was going to. Excellent. Okay, so as we are part of the university, we are working really, really closely with ITS and doing a lot of stuff in that space. So what I'm going to be covering off now is around the alignment, the vendors that the model that we actually use that allows us to develop the stuff that we've got and the speed that we can do it in. And there's a bunch of vendors here today that we can talk about. I hear repeatedly questions around what's going to happen to good old Jade. We'll cover that off. I'll discuss quickly how we work, the process that we go through to actually figure out what we're going to provide and how we're going to provide it, and that is often quite painful from our perspective. What we've learned, which is always good fun, and what we're intending to do for the rest of the year. Okay. So ITS have published a roadmap. That's correct, John? Yep. And this is basically it. So this, when I first started here, I was really encouraged to see this design sitting here. It really does align to what it is that we are doing and we have implemented with the Student First applications. There's a presentation layer at the very top there, user interface. There's a series of integration componentry in that pink box in the middle there. Surrounded by some other technologies that can help protect the organisation. And at the bottom there's a series of databases or systems that sit underneath the bottom of the architecture providing data. Okay, so that big bit at the bottom there is massive in this organisation, right? We've got a lot of old software that is getting well past its use by date. So I think ITS are in the process of regenerating themselves into a service-based model, very similar to the way that we do things now, and are starting to approach fixing some of those technology issues. We're also bringing in other technologies that actually help with that matter as well. So this architecture is critical to what we're doing, right? So the knowing ITS have sanctioned that and we're moving forward with that is a really, really important part of what we're trying to do here. So this is the Student First architecture as Chris has kind of described it. We have a user interface layer, completely separate. Okay, it talks to messaging down to the architectural layer underneath, which is what we call the microservice layer. Through the gateway, there's a thing called an API gateway that stops nasty people coming in doing horrible things with viruses and stuff like that. And underneath that, we've got a series of microservices and databases and things that are loosely coupled together. And as we go further forward, we'll be adding more and more componentry to that bottom layer. Okay. So this layering, just to make it a little bit clearer here, is kind of really clear at the moment. So we've got 3 applications sitting on the top at the moment, and they're all based around the same user interface applications. They're all based around the same look and feel and capability that we've designed for the very first part of the system, which was easy enrollment. So we directly attacked the student-facing application first, deliberately, because we had to take that out to remove SITS, because that was what it was providing. That was the 5% of the functionality that was providing at the time we turned up here. So to get rid of that, we had to write a new front end for the application process. Before we did that, we actually decided how we were going to do it, and the first thing we figured out would be the most appropriate thing would be to bring the College of Education, Health and Human Resources into the fold. They had a paper-based application process of about 25 pages. A lot of their people were from overseas, so they had to download this big piece of PDF, print it out, write a whole bunch of stuff on it in handwriting, scan it back in and send it back to the university, where somebody would pick it up and print it all out and then carry it around in a box for somebody to look at. So it was a pretty painful situation. So we actually implemented the application process for teaching as the very, very first part of the implementation. And looking back on that, it went live in August, and for the first week, it went entirely by itself. There was no communication down underneath the system, down into Jade or anything like that, because we didn't have it finished at that point. But we did have the ability for people to make an application, fill all the information they needed to fill in, and submit it. And it was saved in our system. Right? Jade didn't know about it. Nobody in the university knew about it. But we held on to that data until we implemented the integration layer that connected it to Jade. It was going in test, but it wasn't. We needed to refine it. So we turned that on, and all that stuff just magically flowed down, and everybody did their thing. So it just goes to show how this thing works. So we've got three applications at the front: the UC, the student-facing user interface, the agent portal, the application agent portal, where international agents can apply applications for international students, and the staff portal, which we're in the process of putting together at the moment as well. That purple layer in the middle is what I call the gateway. It's the thing that protects us from nasty things, and underneath that we've got a bunch of microservices. And now you'll see there that you've got things like enroll, apply, assess. Those are related to that Cordit model. You'll see there's a new CRM that we're looking to put in here. So as Chris alluded to at the start, there is a requirement for student relationship management information, what we call the SRM, but it's basically a CRM package that we'll be implementing. We don't really care what that is, and it's going to be kept very, very basic, just to do the sort of stuff that we absolutely need it to do, initially anyway. So the lower levels are the Jade integration, and then down into the bowels of the rest of the university connections from Jade onwards into the likes of the BI systems and the things called UC interface and a whole bunch of other flow-on systems underneath. So we've got vendors that sit here that do this stuff. So each of those layers are completely independent of each other. They talk to each other through simple things called messaging. So we've got a company here called MediaSuite who are operating in the user interface layer. We've got a company called Catalyst, and we've got some people here from Catalyst here today. Hi, Marianne at the back there. And they are providing the microservice layer and are responsible for providing the glue that sticks the user interface to the databases underneath. Okay. And we've got the guys from UC ITS department who have been working with us for the last 2 years as well, managing the connectivity down into Jade and the other systems that we're going to be talking to as we get further and further into the program. So we've got some pretty basic ethoses around how we kind of work in this area at the moment. As you would have heard Chris mention, that we're very, very component based. So a component is a small thing, right? It's a piece that we can actually put our hands on and go, this just does that bit. And you might have another component that does just this bit. And the idea is we stick those components together and you join it together and you make a solution out of it, which is basically what microservices are about. As Chris also alluded to, the integration capability, being able to talk to these components through a low-level under-the-hood interface without anybody having to type stuff in is mandatory. It's absolutely critical. So the stuff that we're looking at procuring to provide functionality like a CRM, for example, must be able to be talked to at a low level to be able to do the things we need it to do without human intervention. Minimum viable product approach. So this is really this is the one thing that Ian Vanstone did drive into us from day one, and I've taken that to heart. even though I sometimes fall off the wagon. It's really about only doing enough to do what you need the application to do at that time. Now, as Chris alluded to earlier, it's really hard to predict what's going to happen in the future. If it did, I would be rich. If I could do that, I'd be a really wealthy chap. And typically what ends up happening is the IT people always, and we as a breed always say, look, we're going to add this feature here because somebody might use it in the future. It could be really, really useful, and it never gets used. Jade, for example, we're probably using about 40% of the capability that was built into that thing that we've had for 12 years. Okay, we are now just turning on some parts of Jade as part of the program to do some stuff that it could have always done for us, and we weren't using it. So, minimum viable product is the key thing, and if you're anywhere near our program and people start talking about we're going to do this, this and this, then MVP will generally come up instantly and kill it. Use what we already have. So we do have a lot of software in here that is really good and fit for purpose. There's no two ways around that. Good example of that, for example, is the Community Force. You know, it's a cloud-based package that manages our scholarships. It was implemented in a great screaming rush, and it needs a bit of help to be configured properly. So we're helping with that at the moment, just to clean things up, standardise it, make it simple, reduce the clutter, and move on, right? That takes me into the standardise and simplify, I should say. So really, the big thing here is making sure that we don't go down the rabbit hole of doing some specific things for some specific people that only they have anything to do with. The standardised approach across the organisation will give a lot of benefit in terms of portability of people, being able to actually have a very clear understanding of how the thing works and all that sort of stuff. So, good old Jade. It's been here for a long time. It's really, really big. There's a lot of stuff here, a lot of what I call incremental complexity, which is a good example of this. The person state rules that get executed every time an application comes into Jade, we mapped those the other day, and they ended up being 13 sheets of A3 paper at 8 point. Massive big flow chart of what goes on here. And the people, Lisa, for example, who's been in the organisation for quite some time, kind of thought that it's all happened at the same time, but no, it's a completely linear flow. And there's a lot of stuff in there that actually stops some things from happening that it shouldn't be doing. So we've already uncovered some issues in that. So there are some problems in that space. Integrating to Jade is very challenging. At the moment, it's very closed. And we've only got so much we can do in that space. So we're actually getting into the organisation's application assessment process, and there are very, very few ways of integrating to Jade once we start getting further in. So it's going to prove to be a bit of fun. Jade isn't particularly testable, as referring to Chris's comments earlier. There's nothing automated about it. It's all manual. So we've got to be really careful about what we do in there. And we're going to eat that elephant one bite at a time. Yum. It'll be fun. What we've found here around the microservices, they really demand rigor. We have, in the program, we have some quite raging arguments about what should be in, what shouldn't be in. Typically Chris ends up winning because he's quite tough at that, but yeah, we'll let him get away with that. And we've actually ended up with a really good solid platform. The complexity about the inherent complexity around building software is really closely managed inside a service. You know, the application service, it only manages applications, right? That's all it ever does. And you can use that from anywhere else inside the organization as well. We have refactored the system lots and lots and lots of times under the hood. You don't even know it's happening. Things are changing constantly. So for the December release of Easy Enrollment, between the 5th of December and about the middle of January, we released 23 versions of the software. Nobody even knew it. It just happened. And the good thing is, this is a testimony to the architectural design that I was part of, Chris, We've only added one extra service since we started the design, and that's around the CRM capabilities that we'll be replacing later on. Right, so these are just screenshots of what it is actually, give you a look of what it looks like at the moment. The current system we're working on at the moment, we've got some study planning going on, we've got document uploads, withdrawal application, change of enrolment, all that sort of stuff's coming in soon. Returning students of all types. At the moment you have to go to UC Student Web, which is quite a jarring jump from where we are. And we're going to get rid of this thing called UC Student Web, which is a piece of application software that's been around for 12 years in here. So this is what the old course selection in UC Student Web looks like. It's been sitting there for the last 10 years. When you went in there, you had to pick from over 1,000 courses to try and figure out what you wanted to do. I can attest to the pain of that because I tried to get my son enrolled here and I had a hell of a job before I started working here. Now I know what's going on. And this is what it looks like now. So sadly, it doesn't quite look very nice on the screen here because you might be missing the contrast of it, but there are sections of little tablet sections sitting there that are the courses that are applicable to what it is you want to do, and we're going to be adding a lot more features and search facilities in there, hooking it up to the outside of the UC website so that you want to actually get a lot more information about that course and be able to actually put it into a shopping cart sort of thing. So you can actually see the points and all that sort of stuff.
Quick question, you use virtual as an example where there's a reasonably finite number of courses.
Yeah.
Like the BA, what would come up there?
Yep, so we are putting course planning together at the moment, so where you can say for a BA, these are all the courses you would normally have for a BA, and then you can also be able to pick a bunch of courses that aren't necessarily for a BA as well if you want to add those in. But we'll have some guidance around the fact that you've actually picked stuff that may or may not get you closer to what you need to be going to. So this is the...
The question though is the look and feel.
Yeah.
Would it be just a huge long list?
No. You'll be able to search through it. There's a bunch of stuff at the top there, which there's a small search facility there at the moment, which actually mirrors the current status of UC Student Web. We are adding a whole bunch of refinement capabilities to those tools as we go on. So under minimum viable approach, it's just enough to get it going, and then we'll add more features rapidly to it in the next few months. This is quite a big thing for the student, right? We've done some usability testing on it, and they really do think this is a significant jump ahead for them. The agent portal. So this is where we're gathering international agents collection. So that is sitting on a standalone CRM proof of concept at the moment that's been productionized. We're bringing that into the same application space as Easy Enrollment because we're getting a lot of international students coming directly through our application as well. So the agencies will be able to do the same sort of thing but have the capability of seeing what else they've got going on here. They've got the added functionality of being able to directly actually have that push straight through to Jade, because at the moment that somebody has to sit there and type it all in at the back end of it. And we have document management capabilities in there as well. Fortunately, these white screens don't look particularly flash on the big display there, but that's an agency list there. There's some applications that they've put in that they can see. They can go and modify to a certain point, change and do what they like to it. And they'll be able to see the status of them as Jade as the assessment process happens inside the organisation. There's the staff administration portal, which is probably of most interest to anybody here. It's got anything to do with management of students. So we've got some initial application functionality around the internal management that we, as a technology side of things, we often find from last year's experiences that we need to be able to look at students rapidly. We need to be able to do things to them quickly. We don't want to have to raise assist tickets to get somewhere to look at stuff. So the intention here is to push all of the capability of the agent of the staff portal back to the staff who are dealing with the student at that time. And it's using exactly the same technology as the rest of the application, so that when the staff member looks at that person's record, they are looking at exactly the same record and the same layout as the student sees it. Okay, so you know exactly what it is that's going on. And that's what that looks like at a base level. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in the bottom of it. Again, You can do a search here for a whole bunch of information. It'll retrieve those students that match those criteria, and then you can go and start working on them, doing things like resetting passwords and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so getting towards the end of it, this is what we're working on coming forward. Conversion management, we're going to be doing quite a lot of work around that to actually help get more and more students coming in. We have some really interesting statistics about the number of students that have come in and we've basically classified them by their level of detail they've given us in the application process that have not submitted. We've got some really interesting numbers around those people and where they're coming from, so we're going to do some more work on that and provide that information to parts of the university to actually work on and try and bring those people in. We're integrating a CRM, as I've mentioned before. We're doing some work around what we call the academic model or the academic guidance, which are the qualifications and courses and prereqs and co-reqs and all the other bits and pieces that string all that lot together. We're trying to make that a lot simpler to manage and clearer for people to understand, especially students. Integrating scholarships. We're working on the application assessment side of things, which is the staff functions that say, is this person able to come here? So in conjunction with the facilities in Jade, we'll be bringing that back up into the staff portal where you'll be doing the work in there rather than in Jade. Yes?
Yeah, I saw the assessment on what the previously, that wasn't examination at all.
No, sorry, no, it's application assessment at this point.
All that previous.
Always, it's all about application assessment, yes. Yes, sorry, at the moment, until a little bit later on when we start looking next year at those sort of things. No, well, it'll be managed in Jade at the moment, as it is at the moment, but as we move on and start eating that Jade monster, we start bringing that capability from the lower level up into our interface layer, then we'll be adding those functionals as we hit them. So it will be towards the end of next year, we'll be starting to look at that. We've got a lot of stuff on at the moment, awful lot of stuff. So the thing is that the more we sort of start providing, the more we're finding people saying, can you do this, can you do this, can you do this for us? So we are quite limited in terms of our scope at the moment. Okay, scholarships integration. So while you're in the application process, why can't you see the scholarships that apply to you right there and then? Which is one of the things we're thinking about putting in fairly soon. Application enhancements, make it even easier for the student to enrol. Next year we're looking at finance, especially the fees and scholarship payments and calculations and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of work to do in that space. We're doing some stuff around business intelligence, data reporting, and we've commissioned a study of how that will look in the new technology space that we're moving to. And we're also continuing, obviously, to decompose the Jade monster, which is quite fun. Okay. Questions?
Are we applying student-based experience to an overhaul of our website so that it aligns with the student training and not college specific?
Okay, so the question was, are we applying the Student First experience to the website? That's a very interesting question. I'm not quite sure I want to answer that. I think that we were talking about this just yesterday, actually, about bringing up the issues of the current state of the website. It needs a bit of work. There's some inaccuracies, need to put it mildly, and yeah, it is something that we will be discussing with the business at some point in the future. It's not something we're directly responsible for at the moment. Yeah. Okay. Yep. I'm sure. So just to give you some other aspect of what the program looks like. So you've been talking to us technology geeks. There are a bunch of people in the program who are more engaged. So they don't let us out to come and talk to the business very often because we're a bit pointy-headed. So we have a bunch of people who are engaging with the business at various levels around the projects that we're moving forward on in the process, what we call the process space. Tim Hathley-Green and the crew, and these are the guys that will be engaging with the business as they move through and discussing all those sort of things with you as they go. And they bring that information back to us. We have conversations with Ian and the SMT and the program board around what it is that we have found and what we're finding is going on, and just feed that back to the organisation to manage.
We have done discussions with the website.
Yeah, well, totally. We are talking with the website people. Absolutely, yes, we are.
Some of the first
Go on,
steps to integrating the experience of the student into the larger website is obviously, as I said before, starting to expose some of that information to the website so they can contextualise that. So it's part of our role as the project is to expose that data to the website operators. They can start contextualising that information and providing a far more tuned experience for the user. And the initial steps of that is talking about application to enrol. Why can't the student from the qualification page on the website click a button, be taken into the application? At the moment, it's look at the qualification on the website and then go into the website and then find it again so that you can then apply for the qualification. So a lot of that streamlining, we call it integrating our application into their application. So it's a far more homogeneous system rather than these sort of monolithic pillars of functionality.
Cool. What you said. Okay, so the question was around the integration with current system called Moodle, right? So, yep, we have been very closely aware of how solid and how critical Moodle is to the organisation. At this point, we haven't made any concrete plans for directly hooking up to it, although there's absolutely no reason why we can't. It's actually supported by one of our vendors, Catalyst here. They're the people who actually support that product in New Zealand, so they know it intimately. So we do have an understanding of what it's doing internally, and it would make sense that if you sign on as a student through our application portal, that you have a single sign-on capability that takes you into wherever you want to go. But that would be something that we'd be looking at in the future.
Can I also sort of provide an answer around that? So I guess Student First is focused around application enrolment assessment of getting a student into university, and now we're in a position of allowing a student to pick a course easily that they want to enrol. One of the things that we do want to do with Student First is address the issue of retention. So we know that our first year students, we have a retention rate of about 75%. And for every 1% of students that we can retain, they probably add over 800K of fees, tuition down the line. So next year, we do want to get into a position of identifying students that are at risk early. So this year, we've got all colleges and academic departments to put grades into Gradebook for first year assessments. So they then are going into Gradebook and then going into Jade, and we have emerging capability of identifying those students in the first 1 or 2 months of their first year at UC. Have I got an F, and an E in my first 4 assessments? If I have, then hopefully the system will say this student is at risk and we need to intervene in some way to try and get them back onto a track. So that is an area that we particularly want to look at, and if you took that to the next step, you would say which students are logging onto the Learn site and are engaging with Learn. If they're not at the lecture or engaging on Learn, then what are they doing? And again, hopefully that would trigger some response from the university. So that is an area that we do want to move into. Does that help?
Yeah. When you say Gradebook, you mean Gradebook and Learn or Gradebook? It's another program.
Yeah, there is a separate thing called Gradebook, and that is where we've got all first year courses marks are going into Gradebook.
Put the marks straight onto Learn.
Yep.
Is that being transferred to Gradebook, or does it go to the next application?
This year we had a mandate of all first year assessments were going to go into Gradebook, and then we're transferring those into Learn, and as into Jade. Yeah, sorry, my mistake. So we're assessments are going into Gradebook, and then we're putting them into Jade.
Is it the Gradebook on Learn? Or
Yep. Yes. Yep. So there's a start about the university taking retention seriously. Just one other comment I'd like to make is that we are seeing the benefits of this program already. So across New Zealand, we know that the total number of domestic students that come to any New Zealand university is declining. So the Tertiary Education Commission predict between 2010 and 2020 there will be 7% less students, domestic students, coming to universities. That's largely a consequence of our demographics and probably declining university entrance. But the reality is there will be 7% less students. So there is this ongoing battle between New Zealand universities about trying to get that share of that declining number of students. So if we win a student, it's definitely a student that another university is lost. Last year, in 2018, it took this university some order of 3 weeks to get an offer out to students that had just got their NCEA results. This year we had offers out to all of NCEA students within 2 hours, and if you were in law and engineering, 2 days. So that is one benefit, and it wasn't entirely around the Student First program, but that was part of the solution, is if we're a lot more responsive of having offers to students in a timely way such that UC is their preferred choice of university. The other examples I would make is we now have the ability to know whether a student that has interest in coming to UC, depending on their level of engagement, how many times they log in, we can now assess them whether they are a cold prospect, a tepid prospect, or a hot prospect. And I'm not sure, those are the terms we use. There are 5. So we classify students that are expressing interest around UC into 5 categories, and what resources we now have around recruiting students, we can actually target to those categories, the hot prospect and the warm student. So we're better targeting our limited resources to those students that are more likely to come to UC than the student that only is logged on once and we didn't actually know that. The final comment I would say is, and again this is partly enabled by Student First but partly by other systems, we are now beginning to identify international agents, of which agents are producing students for UC that are likely to be B grade and A grade students. So we can now identify those agents that supply us with international students, but they either fail or are a C grade student in the first 2 years, versus international agents that are providing high quality students that are going to go through our degree programs with a B or an A grades. Previously, we didn't actually know whether student agents were providing high quality students or low quality students. We can now differentiate those as well. Another benefit of which agent do we want to engage with more than others. So all of this hopefully is producing a stream of students that want to come here, are high quality, and their experience will get them enrolled, applying, and through their degree programs.
What is the future of Jade, and in terms of the assessment side of things, were you having to do a lot of work in the old system to get to where you need to be to do your job? Okay, so Jade, as it currently stands, we do appreciate that it is a sunset technology. From our perspective, the intention is we will get rid of it in the program over a period of time. It will take some time to do. It is a large ERP system, and we need to be very careful about how we go about eating that particular monster, because we can't have the lights go out inside the organisation and have another issue of like a university had just recently in the last enrolment season. So the assessment side of things, to your point earlier, the student assessment, application assessment part of the process, we are working on right at the moment. So we're implementing some more basic process, how do we do things inside the organisation models at the moment, but we will be moving more towards electronic rules-based assessment in the coming months. Okay, it's on the stack for the rest of this year and into early next year to be able to provide that sort of capability. It will generally be over Jade for a start, but it will be providing a user interface that wraps that information up into a state that is much more palatable and easier to use and manage from your side. So the intention is that we have Jade doing its thing while it's doing its thing. We pick up that capability above it, wrap it around it, and then we can then change the bits that we're responsible for a lot faster than we can change Jade. Right? So as long as Jade gets its stuff, we can do our bit at the front end and change it really, really quickly. So that's the procedure.
And the other aspect of that is we are really challenging ourselves around the question of co-requisites or prerequisites. Is that really, is that truly a necessary prerequisite for this course to have that course? So there's a whole work stream around Rach Monteo talking with all of the academic deans and academic managers about what is truly required to progress through a degree program around co-requisites and prerequisites. Now, that's led to some pretty challenging conversations across the university, and sometimes the answer is actually it's not necessary to have a co-requisite or prerequisite, and sometimes there is. So we're going back to fundamentals, and some of this again was we looked at university regulations last year. So university regulations had not actually been reviewed for 24 years. So we've cleaned up a lot of the regulations such that we're clear about students that can come to university, what's required of them. This year we're going through the academic guidance, academic model to answer that very question. As I say, some of it will be solved by a decision inside the university that some things are not necessarily a co-requisite or prerequisite. If there is the case, then we're going to solve it in the new IT.
Is also part of the assessment process we deal with today can be also solved by the student being informed better about the decisions they're making. So if the student is far more informed about not going down rabbit holes or applying for things which they don't have the prerequisites for, the co-requisites, and they're far more informed about the decision-making process, then we're not the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff trying to fix these students up and churning our time rejecting things when they're not required. If we ever provide students with a list of qualifications or courses that are catered for their qualification, it's far more better process for the student and the staff member in the assessment process.
Can I just give one more example? We've now got a student on the program board, and he's providing actually a very interesting perspective to the whole program, and even simple things like having a dashboard on a student log on how many points more do I need to complete my degree. And he gave us the story of him and 16 of his peers actually doing one course too many to complete their degree. They didn't know how far they were through their degree. They took advice. That advice was actually not correct. So they've actually, it might be good from our perspective financially to have 16 students actually do a bit more work than they needed to do, but it's not really the point. What we're trying to do is actually have students complete their degree, and the way we've got our system configured at the moment actually makes it even difficult for the students doing the degree, knowing how far they are through the degree and whether they've actually overqualified. So again, it's a really interesting perspective. So being, I guess, the SMT member responsible for this program, we're now having that discussion of this is a development program at the moment. It needs at some point to be transitioned back to the university in a business as usual state. But we do want to, so we're developing two things. Ideally, what do we want this program to be doing once the development is finished? Where should it sit inside the university? And do we want to have a process of continual improvement? And that's a discussion that we will complete this year, and we'll know where it's going. So I think we've learned that the program is one of continual improvement, continual assessment, and I think that's something that we'll take forward.
Okay, so the question was, when will staff get access to the user interface? Cool, good question. So at the moment, what we're doing with the staff portal is an internal, i.e. into the program, to save an awful lot of time. So every time there's an issue or anything in Student First, we have to do a lot of hard work to find out what is going on, because we can't easily, in a nice user interface, have a look inside the system to see what's going on. We've got tools, developer tools, that require developers to stop doing developing and start looking for things that have gone bang in the night. So the intention is that in the short term, the user interface for Staff Portal will be restricted to Student First in the first month or so, while we settle down the tools and the capabilities that we want to release out to the staff. It's got a pretty horrible interface over it at the moment. It's designed for people like me who don't actually care. But it will need to be cleaned up quite significantly for the staff. So we have that in train for the next couple of releases, right? So we're going to incrementally add bits and pieces to it, and then we'll release it out to probably the likes of the contact centre in the short term, because they're the ones dealing with the student record. And then as we start bringing in assessment and application assessment and other application components to the system, we will provide that to a wider and wider group of staff. So as your need to use it becomes apparent, and then we'll release it to those particular people. And at some point it just becomes the de facto standard for everybody to use and don't have to go into Jade. Okay. Any more questions? I think we've hit our time, just perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming. Ian, do you want to say anything in closing?
Yeah, just a few words. Firstly, thank you for turning up today. As I said at the beginning, many of you have heard of Student First. You've probably had some contact with it. And for me, I would say this, wouldn't I, because I'm responsible for it, but I think it is going to make a huge difference to the university. It is about the student. It is about changing our processes of how we do stuff inside the university in the sense of enrolment and academic guidance. But it is also being done in a way that we are engaging with staff across the university in a process of change management, because a lot of this technology and application is going to be, we don't want to get into a state where it just exists but no one actually interacts with it. That's not going to work. And as Dave alluded to, there are one unnamed university based in Palmerston North that had this problem in this recruitment cycle, where they had an IT solution but didn't actually go through the change management process of that. So we're absolutely hot on having change management training through with the system, and the whole thing is underpinned by some technology. So for me, this is about business process change management, so that staff and students get the benefits of this. And you've just heard today about the enabling technology that's underneath all of that.